Danny, I wanted to turn to you because you briefly mentioned, you touched on your local colleagues, those still in Myanmar, still trying to do their work. And I'm wondering if you could speak to how your treatment, you feel like, may have differed or compared as an American journalist, being an international correspondent in Myanmar, to those of your local colleagues there and what they're facing.
Well, I mean, I could give you what I think is a pretty powerful anecdote. So my team had relocated across the border to Thailand while I was in prison. I, at the time, wasn't aware that that was happening, but before I had left, we were talking about, are we going to have to do this? It was still, we're waiting to see how things would unfold. After I got out of prison, there was a third wave of COVID that swept through Myanmar while I was in prison. And it was just, somehow Myanmar had sort of weathered the previous waves somewhat well. The third wave was just devastating. One of our reporters got word that a relative was possibly fatally ill, and so they decided, they did a lot of research and thought it was all right to travel back to Yangon to visit this relative, to either help her, to say goodbye. They were detained on their arrival. I had just gotten out of prison. I wasn't tortured or beaten. I mean, I was held in prison, but I wasn't tortured or beaten. He sort of disappeared. It took a while for us to reestablish contact with him. And he was in Myanmar, and he wasn't really talking or telling us what had happened. Eventually, he made his way back out of the country. He landed in Thailand with his wife and child, and then traveled back to where the newsroom is, and slowly he started telling us what had happened. And I mean, he wrote really movingly about it several months later. I won't share too many graphic details, but he was basically beaten and raped. Then he decided he wanted to write very explicitly about everything that had happened. And he said at the end of this essay, which we published at Frontier Myanmar, that he knows that a lot of people are experiencing this and aren't talking about it because there's stigmas involved in it. But the Myanmar military constantly uses sexual assault and sexual violence as a tactic, and this has only made it more important for him to speak out about it and to tell the truth to the world. It's an interesting thing because we write in, it's local journalists telling their story in English, targeting an international audience. And that was really important to him, and it's really important to us. But you know, there's also a whole Myanmar Burmese language media ecosystem as well. So it's all of these reporters, it's really important for them to keep telling these stories.
And how are they faring, the ones that are writing and speaking to the local Myanmar population?
I mean, so they're not doing it openly within the borders of the country. There's newsrooms whose output is thriving. They're doing incredible reporting. But it's newsrooms that are in foreign countries where most of the reporters don't speak the local language. They feel extremely isolated. They're not all with their families. They're thinking about their families back home. I mean, nobody's using bylines, but everybody's still pretty terrified that, you know, the regime knows who they are and is, you know, possibly targeting their families.